The poor woman was put up for sale by her step-family for $5 until a lonely, wealthy man. Mara was only 16 when her life became a series of endless chores, cruel words, and broken dreams. She had lived with her father until he passed away, leaving her under the care of her stepmother, a woman whose smile never reached her eyes and whose heart seemed to hold no warmth at all. Mara's father had been a kind man, always telling her she was special, and he had promised her that no matter what happened, she would always be safe and loved. But now, after his death, Mara felt like a small boat drifting alone in a stormy sea, tossed about by the harsh winds of her stepfamily's cruelty. Her stepmother, Mrs. Langley, had 2 daughters of her own, both older than Mara, but none of them had any love or kindness in their hearts. They treated Mara as if she were a shadow, invisible and unnecessary. Each morning, Mara woke before the sun had even risen, the cold floor of the kitchen pressing against her tired feet as she swept, cleaned, and prepared breakfast. She carried heavy water buckets from the well, scrubbed the floors until her hands burned, and washed dishes that seemed to multiply no matter how quickly she worked. Every task was made heavier by the constant whispers of mockery from her stepsisters. "Why are you so slow, Mara?" one would sneer. "You'll never be anything but a servant," the other would add, their voices sharp as knives. Despite her exhaustion, Mara never complained. She had learned that complaining only brought more punishment. She had learned that silence was safer than words in a house where love had died. She would often sit by the window in the tiny moments she had, staring at the world outside, the children laughing in the fields, the birds flying freely above the trees, and imagine a life that was not filled with endless chores. She dreamed of a home where she was wanted, where her efforts were appreciated, and where her laughter would not be met with scorn. Mara's stepmother, however, saw none of the girl's dreams. To Mrs. Langley, Mara was simply a burden, a reminder of her husband's past and an obstacle to her daughter's comfort. She would often mutter under her breath about how much money she wasted on Mara's food, her clothes, and her small comforts. $5 and she's gone, she muttered one day while sitting at the old wooden table, her fingers tapping against the edge as if counting Mara's worth in coins. Her daughters giggled beside her, imagining the idea of selling their stepsister as if she were a common object rather than a human being. Mara overheard their conversation as she washed the dishes that night. Her heart pounded, and a cold fear crept into her chest. The idea that her own family could consider selling her, just to make a little money, was more than she could comprehend. She wanted to cry out to beg them to stop, but the fear of punishment held her tongue. She returned to her small room that night, a room with peeling wallpaper and a thin blanket that barely kept her warm. She curled up on the hard bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had ever truly belonged anywhere in the world. Days passed, and the whispers turned into actions. Mara's stepmother began speaking openly about finding a buyer for her, as if the girl were a piece of furniture to be discarded. Neighbors began to hear rumors, and Mara could feel the fear in her chest grow heavier with each passing day. She tried to be invisible, working faster and staying quieter, hoping somehow that if she did everything perfectly, they would not follow through with their cruel plan. But she knew, deep inside, that perfection would never be enough. Even in the face of such cruelty, Mara had a gentle heart. She often stayed behind at the market, helping the old vendor count his coins or carrying heavy baskets for neighbors who needed help. She could not understand why her stepfamily treated her so badly, while the world outside seemed to respond to kindness with gratitude. It hurt her deeply, but she also knew that anger would not help her survive. She learned to smile, even when her heart was breaking, to speak softly even when she wanted to shout, and to dream even when reality seemed unbearably cruel. One chilly morning, Mara's stepmother ordered her to clean the entire house from top to bottom. "And make it perfect this time," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. Mara nodded silently and set to work, scrubbing floors, dusting shelves, polishing windows, and arranging furniture until her arms ached and her back ached more. Her stepsisters lounged lazily, occasionally sneering and tossing small insults, enjoying every moment of Mara's toil. Mara's hands were raw and her feet were sore, but she did not complain. She had learned the hard way that any sign of weakness was used against her. By evening, the house sparkled, and Mara hoped that perhaps the work would buy her some peace. But her stepmother merely clapped her hands once with a cruel smile and said, Tomorrow, you'll be gone anyway. We'll find someone willing to take you for $5. Let's see if you can survive on your own. Mara's stomach dropped. $5. She could barely imagine what that meant. Did they think someone would truly buy her? Would she be sent away to strangers to a life even worse than this? She felt tears prick at her eyes but forced them back. That night, Mara lay awake, thinking about the future. Every memory of her father came to mind, the way he had laughed, the way he had spoken to her, the way he had made her feel safe in the world. She wondered how he would have protected her from this cruelty, and she whispered a silent prayer for guidance. She prayed not for revenge, but for a chance to live a life where she was valued, where she could be free. She did not know if her prayers would be answered, but the act of praying gave her a small sense of hope that perhaps, somewhere, someone would see her not as a burden, but as a person worthy of love and respect. The days that followed were some of the hardest Myra had ever known. Her stepfamily began to advertise her sale, speaking in hushed tones to neighbors and visitors. Mara felt a mix of shame and fear. She tried to hide, staying in the corners of the house, avoiding eye contact, and doing her work faster than ever before. She found herself wishing she could disappear entirely, become like one of the shadows that crept along the walls at night, unseen and unbothered. But no matter how hard she tried, she could not escape the cruel reality that her stepfamily saw her as nothing more than a piece of property. Even in these dark moments, Mara's spirit refused to be broken. She would steal moments to look at the sky, to imagine a different life, to dream of a world where kindness ruled and cruelty had no place. She remembered the stories her father had told her, of brave women who faced impossible odds and still found happiness. Mara clung to these stories as if they were lifelines, reminding herself that perhaps, even in the midst of despair, there was a chance for a miracle. By the end of the week, Mara felt as if she were living in a nightmare from which she could not wake. Her stepmother's words echoed in her ears. $5 and she's gone. Myra did not know what the future held, but she did know one thing: she could not give up. She could not let fear completely consume her. She would find a way, somehow, to survive, to protect herself, and to hold on to the hope that maybe, just maybe, a better life was waiting for her beyond the walls of her cruel household. And so, Myra faced each day with a quiet courage that no one noticed. She worked, she prayed, and she dreamed. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, perhaps impossible, but she refused to let her spirit be crushed. Somewhere, she believed, there was someone who would see her true value, not the ragged clothes, the calloused hands, or the servant's life forced upon her, but the kind heart, the quiet strength, and the courage that burned quietly within her. Myra woke the next morning with a heavy heart, her small hands trembling as she carried the water from the well. The words of her stepmother, repeated over and over in her mind, made her chest ache. $5 and she's gone. She could not understand how the woman who had shared her house and her father before could speak about her as if she were an object to be bought and sold. Each step she took through the cold, dimly lit corridors of the house felt heavier than the day before, as if the walls themselves were pressing down on her. Her stepsisters, Emily and Clara, were already awake, laughing loudly as they prepared for their day. "Look at her," Clara whispered, smirking at Mara. "She thinks she can hide from what's coming. She's going to be gone soon enough." Mara kept her eyes down, her fingers gripping the bucket tightly. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. She had learned long ago that fear only gave them power. Mara spent the morning cleaning every corner of the house. She scrubbed the wooden floors until they shone, polished the windows until they reflected the sunlight, and dusted the shelves where old books and trinkets sat untouched for years. Yet, no matter how perfectly she worked, her stepmother found fault in every task. "Not good enough," Mrs. Langley snapped as Myra arranged the chairs in the dining room. $5 could buy someone better, someone who actually cares about their work. Myra's heart sank. She wanted to speak, to argue, but her voice had grown weak from years of being silenced. The news of Myra's sale spread quickly through the small village. By midday, neighbors began to whisper about the poor girl who was being offered for just $5. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others avoided looking in her direction, afraid to get involved. Myra felt their eyes on her as she carried heavy buckets, washed the steps, and tidied the yard. Every stare reminded her of her helplessness, but deep inside, a small flame of hope refused to die. She reminded herself again and again that this could not be the end, that somehow, someone would see her not as property, but as a person. By afternoon, the first visitors arrived. Myra watched from the corner of the room as men and women passed by the doorway, curious but hesitant. Some laughed and whispered, treating the situation as a joke. Others shook their heads, muttering that it was cruel and wrong. Mara's stepmother greeted each visitor with a forced smile, explaining how cheap Mara was and how useful she could be. Mara stood silently, her hands clenched at her sides, imagining the world outside, where she might walk freely and not be treated as less than human. None of the visitors seemed truly interested. Some claimed they had no need for a servant, others felt pity but feared the scandal. Mara could feel the tension in the air, the hope rising and falling like the waves of a stormy sea. Each passing face was a reminder that the world was uncertain and sometimes cruel, but also that there was still a chance for kindness to appear where she least expected it. She whispered a silent prayer, asking for guidance, asking for someone who would help her escape the nightmare she was living. That evening, Mara was sent to fetch water from the well again. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As she walked slowly, carrying the heavy pail, her mind wandered to the life she had once known with her father. She remembered the evenings when he would read to her by the fireplace, telling stories of brave women who faced impossible odds and still triumphed. Those memories brought tears to her eyes, but also a quiet strength. She realized that if those women could face difficulties and survive, perhaps she could too. Suddenly, a carriage rolled slowly down the dirt road toward the village. Mara paused, curious. It was unlike any carriage she had ever seen, large, elegant, and gleaming in the soft evening light. The driver, a well-dressed man with a calm demeanor, guided the horses expertly as they stopped in front of her stepfamily's house. Mara felt her heart skip a beat. She had never seen anyone arrive with such authority, such calm presence. Something about the man made her feel both nervous and hopeful, as if he carried a different kind of world with him, one where kindness could exist. The man stepped down from the carriage and walked toward the house with quiet confidence. Mara's stepmother hurried to greet him, her face quickly arranging into a practiced smile. "Good evening, sir." "May I help you?" she asked, her voice sweet but sharp, hiding the greed that had motivated her throughout the day. The man nodded politely. "I've heard about your situation," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I would like to speak with the young woman." Mara's heart raced. She did not know what to expect, but a small part of her dared to hope that perhaps this was the answer to her prayers. The stepmother motioned for Mara to come forward. She did so slowly, her eyes fixed on the ground, not daring to meet the stranger's gaze. The man looked at her kindly, without judgment, without the hunger of others who had come before him. "Are you Mara?" he asked gently. She nodded. "I am Mr. Alden," he continued. "I've heard what your stepmother plans, and I want you to know that you don't have to stay in that house if you don't want to." Mara felt a lump form in her throat. Could it be true? Could someone actually care for her well-being without expecting anything in return? Her stepmother quickly interjected, trying to maintain control. "She is available for $5, sir, a bargain if you ask me." But Mr. Alden did not respond with greed. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "I do not see her as an object, madam. I see her as a young woman in need of kindness and opportunity. I would like to give her a chance to live somewhere safe, to learn, and to grow." Mara's eyes widened in disbelief. She could not understand such generosity, such care, coming from a man she had never met. Without waiting for more words, Mr. Alden offered to take Mara away that very evening. Her stepmother hesitated for a moment, glancing at the small pile of coins she had hoped to receive. The greed in her eyes battled with the realization that she could not stop the man. Finally, with a forced nod, she allowed it. Mara's heart raced as she stepped toward the carriage. The thought that she might finally escape the cruelty of her home made her hands shake with excitement and fear. As the carriage rolled away, Mara looked back at the house that had been her prison for so many years. She saw her stepmother and stepsisters standing at the doorway, their expressions a mix of surprise and anger. Mara felt no bitterness, only a quiet relief. She was leaving behind a world that had never understood her, a place where she had been treated as less than human. Ahead of her lay uncertainty, yes, but also possibility, a chance to build a life that was her own. Inside the carriage, Mara spoke very little, her mind trying to comprehend everything that had happened in just a few hours. Mr. Alden, sensing her nervousness, spoke softly. "You don't need to be afraid." I am here to help, nothing more. His words were simple, but they carried a weight of comfort Myra had never felt before. For the first time in years, she felt safe. For the first time, she imagined that her life could be more than chores, more than cruelty, more than being worth a few dollars. By the time they reached Mr. Alden's estate, night had fallen. The house was grand, yet welcoming. Candles flickered in the windows, and the air smelled of warm bread and clean linens. Mara stepped down from the carriage, her feet sinking slightly into the soft grass, and looked around in awe. She had never imagined a place like this, one where beauty and comfort could exist without cruelty. Mr. Alden guided her inside, showing her a small room that would be hers, a space filled with light, books, and warmth. Mara stood in the center of the room, tears streaming down her face. She could hardly believe that she had arrived here safely, that she had escaped the house that had been her prison. She whispered a quiet thank you to the stars above, to the universe, to anyone who might have listened to her silent prayers. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope not as a fragile dream, but as a reality beginning to take shape around her. That night, as Mara lay in her own soft bed, she reflected on the day's events. The fear, the sadness, the endless toil, everything seemed almost unreal in the warmth and safety of her new surroundings. She knew that life ahead would have its challenges, but for the first time, she also knew that she had allies, that she had someone who believed in her, and that she had the chance to live a life that she chose for herself. Sleep finally came, gentle and deep, carrying her into dreams filled not with fear, but with possibility. Mara woke the next morning to a light she had never seen before, streaming gently through a large window with curtains that swayed softly in the breeze. She blinked, unsure if she was dreaming or if this was truly real. The softness of the bed beneath her, the warmth in the room, the calm in the air. It was a sharp contrast to the cold floors, harsh words, and constant labor of the house she had left behind. Slowly, Mara sat up, her eyes tracing the walls of the room, the neat shelves lined with books, and a small table with a fresh vase of flowers. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. Mr. Alden entered quietly, carrying a tray with warm tea and some bread. "Good morning, Mara," he said softly. "I hope you slept well." Mara nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I did," she whispered. She could not find the words to express what she felt: relief, gratitude, wonder. "Come, eat something. You must have worked hard yesterday, and it's important to start the day with strength." Mara sat down, feeling the simple kindness in his tone, something she had never known at home. She sipped the tea, feeling warmth spread through her body, and slowly hope began to settle deeper into her heart. Over the next few days, Mara began to explore the estate. It was a place unlike anything she had ever imagined. The gardens stretched wide, filled with flowers of every color and trees that whispered in the wind. Birds sang from the branches, and the air carried the scent of fresh soil and blooming petals. She wandered carefully along the paths, her fingers brushing the petals of the flowers, her eyes wide with wonder. Here, the world seemed full of possibility, not pain. Mr. Alden watched from a distance, smiling gently, allowing her the space to discover her surroundings at her own pace. Despite the comfort and beauty of the estate, Mara could not escape the memories of her past. She remembered her stepmother's harsh words, the ridicule of her stepsisters, and the heavy burden of labor that had filled every day of her life. At first, these memories made her anxious, but slowly she began to see them in a different light. She realized that she had survived not because she had been strong in body, but because she had been strong in spirit. Every day she had endured, every insult she had swallowed, every night she had prayed. These things had shaped her courage and her patience. She now carried that strength into her new life. Mr. Alden began to introduce her to small tasks around the estate, not as a servant, but as a way to learn and grow. Mara helped in the library, arranging books and reading aloud passages to him that he had forgotten or missed. She tended to the garden with guidance, learning the names of flowers, how to care for the soil, and how to nurture life in ways she had never imagined. He spoke to her about the world, about people, and about the importance of kindness, honesty, and self-respect. Mara listened carefully, absorbing every word, amazed at the patience and understanding of a man who treated her not as someone beneath him, but as a young woman capable of learning and achieving. One afternoon, Mara discovered a small writing desk in her room, complete with paper, pens, and ink. She hesitated at first, unsure of her own abilities. She had been taught very little, and the thought of writing filled her with both fear and excitement. Slowly, she dipped the pen into the ink and began to write down her thoughts, her dreams, and her memories. Words poured onto the page, stories of her past, hopes for the future, and reflections on the strange journey that had brought her here. She realized that for the first time she had a voice, and that voice mattered. As weeks passed, Myra's confidence grew. She learned not only practical skills but also the quiet lessons of life that Mr. Alden shared with her. He taught her patience, the art of listening, and the courage to stand firm in her beliefs. He encouraged her to ask questions, to seek knowledge, and to dream beyond the walls of the estate. Myra began to see herself not as the poor, unwanted girl her stepfamily had described, but as a young woman full of potential, capable of making choices, capable of learning, and capable of shaping her own destiny. Despite this new life, Myra could not help but wonder about her stepfamily. She thought of her stepmother and stepsisters, imagining how they would react to her transformation. Would they feel regret, anger, or perhaps nothing at all? Myra chose not to dwell on these thoughts for long. She realized that the past had no power over her unless she allowed it. Her future was hers to create, and she was determined to make it meaningful. One day, Mr. Alden took Myra to the nearby village. As they walked through the streets, Myra noticed how people stared at her, some in curiosity, some in disbelief. They had heard of the young girl who had been sold for $5, and now they saw her walking confidently, dressed simply but neatly, accompanied by a kind and wealthy man. Myra felt a mixture of fear and pride. She could sense the whispers, the astonishment, and yet she held her head high, refusing to let shame define her. During their walk, Mr. Alden introduced Myra to several villagers, speaking of her kindness, her intelligence, and her courage. Myra felt a strange warmth as people looked at her not with pity or judgment, but with respect. Children smiled and waved, old neighbors nodded in approval, and even some who had once avoided her now greeted her politely. It was a small but powerful reminder that people could change their perception, and that she was not defined by the cruel labels her stepfamily had placed upon her. Back at the estate, Myra continued to grow and flourish. She spent hours reading, learning, and exploring her talents. She discovered a love for storytelling, inspired by the books she had read and the stories her father had once told her. She wrote letters, kept a journal, and even began to compose small poems that captured her experiences, her feelings, and her hopes. Mr. Alden encouraged her creativity, praising her efforts and offering gentle guidance. For the first time, Myra felt that she had a place in the world, a space where her thoughts and dreams mattered. Yet, Myra remained humble. She knew that her life had been difficult, and she carried a deep empathy for those who were suffering. She often thought of other children and young women in the village, and even in distant places, who might be living in fear or hardship. She began to help where she could, quietly offering assistance, advice, and comfort. She realized that her journey was not only about her own survival, but about using her experiences to bring hope and kindness to others. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Myra sat with Mr. Alden on the veranda, sipping warm tea and watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. "You have grown strong, Myra," he said softly, "not just in body but in heart and mind. The world will challenge you, but I know you are ready." Myra smiled, a quiet smile full of gratitude and newfound confidence. "Thank you, sir," she said, "for everything, for believing in me when no one else did." Mr. Alden placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, a gesture of trust and support, and Myra felt a deep sense of belonging. Myra's days became a balance of learning, growth, and quiet reflection. She no longer feared the world outside, for she had learned that kindness could exist, and that courage was built not by avoiding hardship, but by facing it with patience and hope. She felt a sense of purpose developing within her, a desire to live not only for herself, but for the greater good, to use her experiences to help those who were trapped in fear or suffering. As the weeks turned into months, Myra began to imagine a future she had never dared to dream of before. She saw herself as a confident, educated, and compassionate woman, capable of making a difference in the lives of others. She realized that her life was no longer defined by her stepmother's cruelty, by the whispers of neighbors, or by the hardships of her past. Instead, she was defining herself through her actions, her learning, and her courage. Myra had come a long way from the girl who had been treated as nothing more than a burden. She had survived the cruelty of her stepfamily, escaped the threat of being sold, and found a place where she could grow, learn, and be valued. And though challenges would still come, she now faced them with a heart full of hope, a mind eager to learn, and a spirit unbroken. For Mara, the world was no longer a place of fear. It was a place of possibility, waiting for her to shape it with courage, kindness, and determination. Mara's life had begun to change in ways she had never imagined. Every day at Mr. Alden's estate brought new lessons, new experiences, and new opportunities for her to grow. She had learned how to care for herself, how to read and write with confidence, and how to approach life with patience and courage. The world outside her stepfamily's house no longer seemed frightening. Instead, it felt like a place full of possibilities, waiting for her to explore and understand. One bright morning, Mr. Alden called Myra to the library. The walls were lined with tall shelves, filled with books that smelled of age and wisdom. "Myra," he said gently, "I want you to start helping me with some of my affairs. Nothing complicated at first, but small tasks that will teach you responsibility and judgment. You have a keen mind, and it is time you use it to learn about the world beyond the gardens." Myra felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had never handled anything so important before, but she trusted Mr. Alden and wanted to prove herself. Over the next few weeks, Myra learned quickly. She organized letters, helped with accounts, and learned how to communicate with people respectfully and clearly. Mr. Alden guided her patiently, explaining each task in detail and encouraging her whenever she felt unsure. He never scolded her for mistakes but used them as lessons, helping her understand how to improve and make better decisions next time. Myra began to realize that learning was not frightening, it was empowering. With every task she completed, her confidence grew, and she began to see herself in a new light. While Myra gained confidence in practical matters, she also grew emotionally. Mr. Alden encouraged her to express her thoughts, feelings, and ideas openly. He listened without judgment and responded with kindness, showing Myra that her opinions mattered. She learned to trust herself and to recognize the value of her own voice. No longer silenced by fear, Myra began to dream bigger dreams. She imagined helping others, using her knowledge to make a difference, and perhaps even creating a life where kindness and fairness were more important than wealth or power. One day, Mr. Alden suggested they visit the village together. Myra had been there once before, but this time the visit was different. She walked proudly by his side, her posture straight, her head held high. People stared at her, whispering and pointing, remembering the girl who had been sold for $5. Myra felt a strange mixture of pride and curiosity. She realized that the past no longer defined her. She was no longer the frightened, powerless girl they had known. She was someone with strength, courage, and dignity. In the village, Myra began to help where she could. She spoke with the children, teaching them simple lessons she had learned, and shared stories that inspired hope and courage. She assisted the villagers in small tasks, offering advice, guidance, or simply a kind word. Myra found joy in helping others, realizing that her past struggles had given her a deep empathy for those who suffered. Every act of kindness she performed made her feel stronger, more confident, and more capable of facing any challenge that life might bring. Back at the estate, Myra continued to grow. She spent hours reading books on history, science, and art. She experimented with new skills, from painting to gardening, discovering talents she had never known she possessed. Mr. Alden encouraged her curiosity, allowing her to explore her interests without judgment. Myra felt a sense of freedom she had never known, a freedom that allowed her mind and heart to expand. Each day, she became more aware of her own potential and more determined to shape a future that reflected her values and dreams. Despite the new life she had found, Myra never forgot where she had come from. She thought often of her stepmother and stepsisters, wondering how they had reacted to her disappearance. She also remembered the fear and loneliness that had filled her early life, and she carried these memories as a reminder of how far she had come. Myra realized that her experiences had shaped her, but they no longer controlled her. She had taken control of her life, and with it, she could create a future full of hope, compassion, and purpose. One afternoon, Myra and Mr. Alden were walking through the gardens when they came upon a small, injured bird. Its wing was broken, and it struggled to move. Myra's heart ached for the tiny creature. She carefully picked it up, cradling it in her hands, and looked at Mr. Alden. "Can we help it?" she asked softly. He nodded, showing her how to make a small splint for the bird's wing and how to care for it until it could fly again. Mara felt a deep satisfaction as she watched the bird slowly recover. It reminded her that even the smallest acts of care could make a difference, a lesson she would carry with her always. As months passed, Mara's confidence and skills continued to grow. She began to take on larger responsibilities in the estate, managing small projects and helping Mr. Alden make decisions. He trusted her judgment, consulted her ideas, and treated her as an equal partner in his work. Mara felt proud, realizing that she was no longer just a guest or a ward. She was a valued member of the household, someone whose abilities and opinions mattered. Yet Mara's journey was not without challenges. Sometimes the memories of her past returned, threatening to shake her confidence. The words of her stepmother, the ridicule of her stepsisters, and the harshness of her early life would creep into her thoughts. But each time Mara reminded herself of her strength, her resilience, and the kindness she had received. She remembered the lessons of courage, patience, and hope that had guided her so far. Slowly, the fear that had once dominated her life began to fade, replaced by determination and a belief in her own worth. One evening, Mara sat with Mr. Alden by the fireplace, a warm glow filling the room. "You have grown into a remarkable young woman," he said, his voice full of pride. "Not because of wealth or comfort, but because of your character, your heart, and your courage. Never forget that these qualities are what truly matter in life." Mara smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. She realized that she had learned more than she had ever imagined, about the world, about others, and most importantly, about herself. Mara's transformation did not go unnoticed. Word of her growth, intelligence, and kindness spread through the village. People who had once pitied her or whispered about her situation now spoke of her with respect and admiration. Children looked up to her as a role model, and adults sought her advice and assistance. Mara felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her life, once filled with fear and sorrow, had become a source of hope and inspiration for others. Despite all the changes, Mara remained humble. She knew that her journey had been shaped not only by her own efforts, but also by the kindness and guidance of Mr. Alden. She also understood that life would continue to present challenges, and that growth and learning were ongoing processes. But Mara no longer feared the future. She faced each day with courage, determination, and a heart full of hope, knowing that she had the strength to overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. Mara's life at the estate became a balance of learning, growth, and service. She nurtured the gardens, cared for the animals, read and wrote every day, and helped those in need in the village. She developed friendships, built trust, and discovered a deep sense of purpose. Through all of this, she never forgot the lessons of her early life, the importance of resilience, the power of hope, and the value of kindness. Mara had transformed not only her own life, but also the lives of those around her, proving that courage and compassion could overcome even the darkest beginnings. As the seasons changed, Mara reflected on her journey. From the frightened girl who had been treated as nothing more than a burden to a young woman full of confidence, skill, and compassion, she had come a long way. She realized that her experiences, both painful and joyful, had shaped her into someone capable of making a real difference in the world. And though she knew that challenges would still come, she faced them with strength, wisdom, and hope, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Mara had learned that life's hardships did not define her, but her response to them did. She had discovered that kindness could change hearts, courage could overcome fear, and hope could light even the darkest paths. Her transformation was not just about her escape from cruelty. It was about the growth of her character, the discovery of her potential, and the creation of a life filled with meaning, purpose, and joy. And so Mara's story continued, a story of resilience, hope, and transformation. She had left behind the fear, the cruelty, and the despair of her past, stepping into a world where she could shape her own destiny, learn from her experiences, and bring light to the lives of others. For Mara, the journey was far from over, but she faced it with a heart full of courage, a mind eager to learn, and a spirit unbroken, ready to embrace the life she had fought so hard to create. Mara had come a long way from the frightened girl who had been treated as nothing more than a burden. Every day at Mr. Alden's estate had taught her something new, about kindness, about patience, and most importantly, about herself. She had discovered that strength was not just in muscles or skill, but in heart and spirit. She had learned that a kind word could lift spirits higher than any gold, and that courage was built not by avoiding fear, but by facing it with determination. Mara now understood that her past, though painful, had shaped her into someone capable of making a difference in the world. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the estate, Mara stood at the edge of the garden, looking out at the village in the distance. She had made frequent trips there over the past months, helping the children with reading, assisting the elders with small tasks, and offering advice and comfort to those in need. The villagers who had once whispered about her with pity now greeted her warmly, their faces lighting up with recognition and respect. Mara felt a quiet joy in knowing that her life had become more than survival. It had become a source of hope for others. Mr. Alden approached her quietly, carrying a small basket of freshly picked flowers. "Mara," he said gently, "I think it is time you see the full measure of what you have accomplished. You have grown strong, wise, and kind, but there is still more you can do. You have the power to change not just your life, but the lives of many around you." Mara turned to him, her eyes bright with curiosity. "What do you mean, sir?" she asked. Mr. Alden smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You have learned much here, but the world beyond these walls is waiting for someone like you, someone who knows suffering but has not let it destroy her spirit, someone who can inspire others by example." Myra's heart swelled with both excitement and nervousness. She had never imagined herself in such a position of responsibility. Yet, she also realized that everything she had learned, the patience, the courage, the empathy, had prepared her for this moment. She was ready to step into a world that might challenge her, but also reward her with the chance to make a meaningful difference. With Mr. Alden's guidance, she began to plan ways to help the village more actively. She organized small reading sessions for the children, taught young girls basic skills in sewing and gardening, and helped families understand simple ways to improve their homes and livelihoods. Mara's days became busy, but fulfilling. She found joy in seeing the smiles on the children's faces as they learned something new, and satisfaction in knowing that her advice helped families improve their lives. Each small success strengthened her confidence and deepened her sense of purpose. The girl who had once been trapped and afraid was now a guiding light for others, using her experiences and knowledge to bring hope to those who had none. She had learned that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple outward, creating change far beyond what she could see. One afternoon, Mara received news that her stepmother and stepsisters had been asking about her in the village. They had heard that she was living with a wealthy man and had gained education, respect, and confidence. Mara thought about them briefly, remembering the cruelty they had shown her. But instead of anger or bitterness, she felt a quiet pity. They had chosen greed and meanness, and now they faced the consequences of their own choices. Mara realized that forgiveness was more powerful than revenge, and that her own life's happiness was far more important than any satisfaction she might gain from seeing them suffer. She chose to focus on her new life, on the people she could help, and on the joy she had found in growth and service. Mara's relationship with Mr. Alden also deepened during this time. He became not just her mentor, but a trusted companion who guided her with wisdom and patience. He encouraged her dreams, supported her efforts, and celebrated her successes. Mara realized that kindness and guidance could change lives, and she resolved to extend the same generosity to others. She began mentoring other young girls in the village, teaching them to read, write, and dream beyond the limitations that society or circumstances might impose. Her reputation as a compassionate and capable young woman spread, and soon she became a symbol of hope for the entire community. The estate, once a quiet sanctuary, became a place of learning and growth. Mara helped organize small classes, reading circles and workshops for villagers, sharing not only practical skills, but also lessons in confidence, self-respect, and empathy. Children and adults alike came to see her as someone who understood hardship, but had turned it into strength. Mara found herself smiling more than she ever had before, her heart light with the satisfaction of knowing that she was making a positive difference. Despite all her successes, Mara remained humble. She remembered her past struggles, the nights spent crying quietly in a cold room, the days of endless work and ridicule. She carried these memories not as chains, but as reminders of how far she had come. They kept her grounded, reminding her that empathy and kindness were her greatest strengths, and that anyone could rise above cruelty and hardship with determination, courage, and support. One day, Mara received a letter from a distant relative, someone who had heard of her journey and wished to offer assistance and support. The letter praised her courage and determination, encouraging her to continue her work in the village and beyond. Mara felt a surge of pride and gratitude. She realized that her story was no longer one of fear and suffering, but of growth, resilience, and hope. Her life had become a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of education, and the strength of the human spirit. As months turned into years, Myra continued to grow into a remarkable young woman. She had transformed from a poor, powerless girl into someone capable of inspiring and helping others. Her past hardships, once a source of fear and pain, had become the foundation for her compassion, courage, and understanding. Myra had discovered that true wealth was not measured in money or possessions, but in knowledge, kindness, and the ability to make a positive impact on the lives of others. One evening, as Myra walked through the garden with Mr. Alden, she reflected on her journey. She remembered the fear, the loneliness, and the cruelty of her early life, and compared it to the growth, joy, and purpose she now experienced. Tears filled her eyes not of sorrow, but of gratitude and relief. She had survived, learned, and transformed. She had found a life filled with respect, opportunity, and love, and she knew that she had the strength to continue making a difference. Mr. Alden looked at her with a gentle smile. "You have done more than I could have imagined," he said. "You have grown into a woman of courage, kindness, and wisdom. Never forget the power you hold, not just in skill or knowledge, but in your heart." Myra nodded, feeling the truth of his words deeply. She realized that her journey had not ended, it had only begun. She now had the ability to shape her life and the lives of others in meaningful ways. Myra continued her work, dedicating herself to education, compassion, and community building. She mentored young girls, helped families, and inspired hope wherever she went. Her life became a living example of resilience and transformation, a story that people would tell for years to come. She knew that hardships would still come, but she faced them with courage, wisdom, and an unwavering belief in the goodness of the human heart. And so, Myra's journey reached a remarkable point of fulfillment. From the girl who had been treated as nothing, sold for a few coins, and forced into servitude, she had become a strong, independent, and compassionate young woman. She had transformed her pain into purpose, her fear into courage, and her struggles into the foundation of a life that inspired and uplifted others. Her story was one of hope, resilience, and the power of kindness to change lives. Myra's life had come full circle. She had left behind the cruelty of her stepfamily, embraced the guidance and support of a kind mentor, and discovered her own strength and potential. She had built a life filled with purpose, compassion, and respect, touching the lives of everyone she met. And as she looked toward the future, she knew that she would continue to grow, to learn, and to bring hope to others, proving that even the darkest beginnings could lead to a bright, meaningful, and extraordinary life.